People go to see science fiction, horror, fantasy movies for a reason. They don't go to see two people in a room talking at a table and discussing politics. They go to see larger-than-life concepts, stories, people screaming, women running around scantily clad, chased by horrible, monstrous creatures or deformed human beings.
They are not human, but they hunt human women, and not for killing. Humanoids from the Deep, the 1980 sci-fi monster movie from Roger Corman's New World Pictures. Things go horribly wrong when a Canco fish cannery experiment with trout growth hormone accidentally mutates into depraved human-like creatures with a ravenous appetite to procreate with the village of Noyo's virile women. Featuring a haunting soundtrack by renowned composer James Horner and terrifying special effects creations by Rob Bottin, Chris Wallace, and Kenny Myers. Humanoids from the Deep lives on today as a Corman cult classic.
At the time, they weren't calling Humanoids from the Deep. They were calling it Beneath the Darkness. And basically, it was a variation on the creature from the Black Lagoon, more or less. And I found out the reason that they were calling it Beneath the Darkness was that they didn't feel they could get a name cast if they sent out scripts called Humanoids from the Deep. But Beneath the Darkness sounded more like a kind of a mystery thriller. But actually, this movie was about humanoids from the deep. They were kind of giant coelacanths, but humanoid, but creatures, who would rise out of the deep and attack women and rape them.
Humanoids from the Deep was one of our most successful creature films. I had a woman director on that, whereas normally you would have a male director on this type of film. But I've always felt a good director can direct anything, and I told her before the shooting, here is the situation. Remember this. The humanoids kill the men and rape the women. She said, got it. The humanoids kill the men and rape the women. She shot the killing of the men in the most gory fashion imaginable. It was so terrible on the screen. Then shot the raping of the women with shadows on the rocks, indicating that something was happening off screen. It was one of the few times I really thought there's a difference here in thinking this woman really shot the killing of the men, but she did not shoot the raping of the women, so we had to bring in a second unit director who shot that.
There just wasn't enough happening to make it a Roger Corman movie. I mean, there weren't any exploitive hits that took place. I mean, there weren't enough humanoid attacks. There wasn't enough. There weren't enough girls in it. There wasn't enough sex or anything. I mean, it was very, it was very un-Roger Corman-like.
In putting the picture together, I realized that there were certain problems with it. Some of the big set pieces, humanoid attacks on humans, etc., were missing certain coverages, and not only that, it just wasn't scary enough. It wasn't thrilling enough or exciting enough. So I had to call Roger and tell him that I thought we had some problems, and I wanted him to know up front before he saw the picture that I thought certain, things that we wanted to have working in the picture weren't working. He decided that we would cut the picture even tighter, get out any loose air, just get the story going, and then we would figure out specifically what was missing in different parts of the picture. So basically it had to do with exploiting the humanoid creatures so that they were scary to an audience and so that there were big shocks.
When we cut the film together and realized we had all the killings in great detail but not the rapes, I felt maybe I should go with a man to shoot that. And Jim clearly showed ability as an assistant director, so I asked him to shoot it. He became the second unit director. He shot those scenes very well.
We went through the existing footage and we made a list, and we listed each scene and the new scenes we were going to do, and the partials we were going to do, and we timed out when the hits would come, when people would go, whoa.
This resulted in a series of reshoots later on, after we got the picture to a length that we liked, which were basically, how can I say, exploitation scenes.
All the people associated with the very sexy film that was cut, they were not on set with us. That was a completely different film, shot at a completely different time. We shot a film that was called Beneath the Darkness. And later, another film was shot in a way that was called Humanoids from the Deep, and it was spliced into our film. And this film was very sexy and full of teenagers and full of sexy late night fun. And it was a complete surprise to the cast when we saw that.
The original director, Barbara Peters, of course, was very upset about what had happened to the picture. I don't know what Barbara knew or didn't know, and it could be that she was not aware precisely of what was going on at this point in the post-production. But she did, express quite a lot of dismay.
In fact, Ann Turkel took it to the talk show circuit to protest what had happened. She said that we had shot one film and they had spliced in another.
I believe some of the cast members were also upset because the movie that they thought they were making, or was Beneath the Darkness, a psychological thriller, turned out to be Humanoids from the Deep, which had, gratuitous violence, sex, and nudity.
I met Mark on numerous occasions, and he had a great sort of New World attitude of just kind of plugging along, and the typical line at New World Pictures wasn't so far so good, it was so far so what. And Mark was just kind of like, yeah, I know it's insane, it's impossible, but let's just keep going.
We shot on a underwater beach at 7 o'clock in the morning. It took a couple hours for the tide to pull back. And I remember getting a call to come down to set with my makeup kit because the woman that the salmon was attacking's lips had turned blue from the cold, and we had to bring them back to pink.
The scene where Carol goes in to take a shower, they asked me, they said, would you do a nude shot in the shower to be shot very tastefully? And I said, I don't do nudity. I'd never done anything, so, for me to say I don't do nudity, I mean, I never worked for more than $7 an hour. And they said, oh, that's okay, don't worry about it. Then I saw the film, and of course they spliced in a girl who just had this rockin' body taking a shower in the nude. I never knew anything about it until I saw the film.
We had this big attack on a county fair, but we were missing incidents within that attack that we could focus on, that we would see certain pieces of mayhem. In this scene, Miss Salmon is attacked and actually fights off the humanoids and runs away, but not before one of the humanoids pulls off her bikini top, and we have ample amounts of nudity as well. So what can I tell you? We have sex and horror and mayhem all in the same frame. This is exploitation filmmaking, and worked pretty well, What can I say? It really did.
My agent said to get a Screen Actors Guild card, the best thing to do is to try to get into a Roger Corman film. So my agent sent me down for my interview, and I auditioned for the role of Miss Salmon, the beauty queen of the Salmon Festival, and I have never been a beauty queen at any festival, and I got the part. When I worked in Humanoids from the Deep, I worked second unit with Jim Spartalotti as the director.
The carnival scene really came out great. I mean, we had Miss Salmon, who, by the way, the humanoids, of course, had become humanoids by eating DNA-altered salmon. So Miss Salmon seemed like a perfect target for them, and they chased her. One of them cornered her and rips off her top. And then she gets really angry and picks up a rock and smacks him in the face. And we put this like smack sound, little blood comes flying out, and she runs away screaming, and the audience went nuts.
We filmed one day on Leo Carrillo Beach. I was with the monster, and the special effects people were terrific.
People working on special effects with me were trained, or at least asked, to deal with a low budget, but to give me expensive, good-looking special effects. We do a lot of preparation for our special effects, and I take personal pride in the fact that even though the films are generally low or medium budget, our films from a special effects standpoint look a little bit bigger.
I think that some people think of those films as more tongue-in-cheek, or they're just horror films, or they're just low-budget films to have fun with. But I think that Roger was expecting me to always score them relatively seriously and relatively well, because ultimately the music was the final sort of piece of clothing on the film. So the film might be schlocky to begin with, but all the craftspeople that would put their layer on, I think we're all trying really hard to make the story as good as it could be, or the filmmaking as good as it could be, or the acting as good as it could be.
In really low budget production, you have to be inventive. You have to come up with ways of doing things that you wouldn't normally do. And I think that probably does show in Roger's pictures. You wind up appreciating just how much Roger got out of so little in his films, usually only in retrospect. And you know, now as a kid watching early Corman films, is like, oh yeah, you know, there's the monster, there's the action, there's the girl, you know, all that stuff. In retrospect, looking back, you kind of go, wow, he pulled that off, and there's nothing there. You know, there's nothing in a lot of these scenes, but the camera work keeps it alive, the editing keeps it alive, and there's a lot of really good, solid storytelling and filmmaking in Corman pictures.
We worked out of a lumberyard, an ex-lumberyard in Venice, and that was just part of the magic of it. You sort of had no time to double think yourself. You were working constantly and frantically and working with the director in a very intense atmosphere. And you had 14 days, and the musicians you would hire were all top musicians. They were all union players, but you would have to hire them at non-union rates. And I would remember these sessions where we would have to try and find a studio at night and record union players at night so that I could pay them non-union wages and we wouldn't get caught.
I think, as any writer or director or producer will tell you, when you are under a gun like that, it can pay off because you reduce everything to its simplest form. You reduce everything from script to performance to prop construction to makeup to sets, lights, costume. Everything comes down to a simple core. And that's usually all you need. Good story, fun story, and a lot of drive.
I think Roger was very talented at picking people who were passionate about what they did, and perhaps at points taking advantage of that by not paying them anything, but at the same time giving them a chance to see what they can do, and at worst firing them if they screwed up.
We had a very limited budget. I'm not sure what the budget was, but it wasn't much, which meant that we had really one fully functioning humanoid suit and two suits that you could use in certain angles that were not very convincing compared to the chief suit, but you'd get away with it. Now, there's supposed to be an army of humanoids, you know, tens of hundreds maybe, I don't know how many, but dozens at least, which means you've got like 3 humanoids at most in any one shot. You have to really manipulate the shots.
When you see the final version, you see all these humanoids, but the joke was there were like 3 humanoids, and to me there was really only one humanoid. I was only face to face with one humanoid, so the humanoid army was completely made up. It wasn't a blue screen. It was just angles and shots and the imagination of the special effects people. It was really just a couple of guys in humanoid costumes just repeatedly attacking everyone.
The production was very, very lucky to have gotten the suits designed by Rob Bottin, who is one of the great makeup artists and special, character creature makeup artists in the world.
Rob, with his budget, was able to make, I think he made about 3 humanoid costumes, which I wouldn't even call them costumes. I think they were just humanoids. We had 2 that had just regular arms, and then one of them had these extended arms, which was a very difficult thing to do. The guys that were in those suits were not mimes or anything else. They were guys that worked with Rob. They were actually PAs, a couple of guys that had gone to SC Film School. And they were there working with Rob and learning what he did. And then he put the suits on them, and they said, okay, I'll do it. And here, so they were, you know, physically pretty fit. Everybody was then. We were all young. But they had to carry this thing on their arm that would extend their arm about this far, so they had to manipulate it with levers inside. Very, very tough and very tiring. And I can imagine extremely claustrophobic.
It fell to me to assemble the first suit. And the first suit was hand sewn onto one of our crewmen, who stood with the tail section, which was a separate a belt-on affair, under the wetsuit, and each piece, thighs, calves, front and back, feet, abdomen front and back, chest front and back, arms, were all in separate pieces and had to be hand sewn onto the wetsuit. It took a day and a half.
The interesting thing about Roger Corman films is that the effects are always there. They're not always good, they're not always the best. Sometimes they're pretty darn good, but they're always there, and they're always the payoff. And Roger understood that people go to see the kind of movie he was making to see that stuff.
I do remember thinking the night that we shot on Humanoids from the Deep that the creature that they created was quite creepy and looked as creepy to me as the Aliens film creature. So I was really kind of impressed.
The humanoid was pretty hokey, but it was kind of like every kid's idea of what a humanoid should look like. He had come out of the water, and he was part monster, part lizard, part kind of kid dinosaur. If you were holding a little figurine, that's what it would look like. He was gooey and plasticky, and he could go in and out of the water, and it was smelly and sticky and pretty classic Japanese horror film monster.
Roger Corman films utilize special effects in a great way, in the sense that they allow the audience to experience something on an imaginative level and yet know that it's not really the case. It lets the audience fill in the blanks, which when you shoot at night especially allows for that. Everyone has incorporated that aspect. The less you see sometimes, the more scary it is. So on Roger Corman budgets, you kind of notice that a lot of special effects are at night, and your imagination can fill in something creepier.
Working on Corman pictures is exhausting in the extreme. It's just one of those things where I don't know how to describe it. It's just really, really demanding in the best way possible. On a Roger Corman production, you go in knowing you have to deliver. It's a matter of making it happen on an incredibly compact time frame.
Film is an illusion of movement and images that create the sense of something happening in movement in time. It's a way of capturing reality, but you can manipulate that reality. And that's something that we had to do a lot on film. You can change speeds, you can put subliminal images in there, you can double up actions because the brain only has so much time to process what the eye sees, and you basically can create illusions and fool the audience into thinking there's something greater or bigger than what is there.
Mark Goldblatt, the editor who was at the beginning of his career, he was a brilliant and is a brilliant editor. He was able to cut together the film to give us as much fright as possible, but leave a little bit of breathing room for human reactions.
I'd have to take these shots, take a shot of a humanoid from this angle, blow it up, and then flop it, and have humanoids coming from here and coming from here, but it might be the same shot flopped and blown up, and a lot of quick cutting to create mayhem.
I like to have beautiful women in my films. On the other hand, I don't like to have them reacting to what other people are doing. I prefer that the woman be strong, be independent, make her own decisions, and solve her own problems as much as possible.
Roger Corman kind of puts a twist on the heroine in Scream films and B movies. Although traditionally one thinks of the Scream Queen as someone who is a victim of the movie, etc. But Roger really also started women as the victors. Roger's philosophy, I think, is that women can start in the position where they are the ones who are in the position of threat and danger, and then they overcome that threat.
Carol ended up to be the one with the real warrior skills, and I think this is a classic Corman female heroine. She may be in peril and she's being pursued by monsters, in this case, very large lizard-like fish, but she had all the right stuff.
As we all know, women are smarter than men. The fact that they can be victimized, they're a bit weaker perhaps than a humanoid, is understandable, but fighting back is a typical Roger woman. They might get taken down, but they won't go easily.
In the end sequence where Carol fights the humanoids, where you see what she was made of, and what's remarkable is she not only wins the fight, but she wins it with cleaning products, which was just the perfect home heroine tool, weapon of choice. There is a quiet evolution of Carol throughout the shooting.
The character of Doug McClure's wife in the picture is fighting humanoids off in the kitchen, and she finds kitchen sprays and sprays the humanoid in the face, and then she gets a butcher knife and starts stabbing. And as I was editing, you got a wide shot of her stabbing the creature, and then tight shots of a knife, and I was trying to make this interesting, and I had cut little pieces of film. I had like 3-frame cuts or 4-frame cuts of just the knife coming in, and it was very late at night, and I ran what I had done, and what I had done is I had mistakenly lost frames between the knife coming into frame and the knife coming down and the knife coming down and the knife coming down. So one of the shots looked like this, or but it looked good. It looked great. It looked like a visual effect. So I realized that if I take certain frames out, I can get these great effects. So as the stabbing of the humanoid becomes much more intense, and we're cutting back and forth between the humanoid and the stab, and the woman trying to kill because she knows if she doesn't get this humanoid, she's dead meat. And the knife is going